The water remembers everything. Long before machines carved the earth, before computers drew lines on maps, the people of ancient China moved mountains and bent rivers to their will. They created something so vast, so impossible, that even today we struggle to understand how they did it. These were the canals, waterways that stretched across an entire civilization, pathways that connected north to south, east to west, binding a fractured land into one empire. This is their story. Picture China 2,000 years ago, a land of extremes. In the north, dry plains bake under relentless sun, rivers run thin, and crops struggle to grow. In the south, rain falls in sheets, rivers overflow their banks, rice paddies flood. The land drowns in water it cannot use. Between these two worlds lies a distance that seems impossible to cross. Mountains rise like walls, valleys cut deep into the earth, natural barriers that have kept people apart since the beginning of time. The Chinese people faced a problem that would have defeated lesser civilizations. How do you feed millions when water flows in the wrong places? How do you move goods from one end of a vast empire to the other when roads turn to mud and mountains block the way? How do you unite a people separated by geography itself? The answer came not in a single moment but across generations. It came in the form of the canals. The earliest canals were small, modest ditches connecting one village to another. Farmers dug them with simple tools, shovels made of wood and bronze, baskets woven from reeds. They moved earth one handful at a time. These first canals brought water to fields. They turned barren land into gardens. They saved lives during drought. But they were just the beginning. As dynasties rose and fell, the canals grew. Each ruler saw the power in controlling water. Each generation pushed the boundaries of what seemed possible. The canals became arteries. They carried not just water, but life itself through the body of China. The Qing dynasty took on a project that staggers the mind. They would connect the Yellow River in the north to the Yangtze River in the south. This was not a small undertaking. This was engineering on a scale the world had never seen. The distance between these two great rivers measured over 1,000 miles. The terrain between them included everything nature could throw at human ambition: flat plains, steep mountains, swamps that swallowed men and tools, rock that broke iron implements. But they did it anyway. The Grand Canal would become the longest artificial waterway ever built. It took centuries to complete. Millions of workers gave their lives to its construction. The death toll remains unknown. History does not record the names of the farmers, the slaves, the soldiers who dug until their hands bled, who carried stones until their backs broke, who drowned in the very waterways they were creating. What we do know is this: they succeeded. The engineering required was beyond anything that had come before. The canal had to climb and descend with the landscape. Water does not flow uphill. This is a law of nature, but the Chinese engineers found a way to break that law. They invented the pound lock, a simple idea that changed everything. Imagine a section of canal with gates at both ends. A boat enters through one gate. The gate closes behind it. Water flows in or drains out, raising or lowering the boat to the level of the next section. The second gate opens. The boat continues on its way. This system allowed vessels to climb mountains and descend valleys. It turned water into stairs. The pound lock was invented in China nearly 1,000 years before Europe discovered the same technology. It was a breakthrough that modern engineers still use today. Every time a ship passes through the Panama Canal, it uses the same principle the Chinese developed when Europe was still in the Dark Ages. But the locks were just one piece of the puzzle. Canals needed constant water supply. In some regions, natural rivers fed the canals. In others, the engineers had to be more creative. They built reservoirs in the mountains, massive artificial lakes that collected rainwater. They constructed channels that diverted streams and rivers. They created a network so complex that mapping it required skills we would today call advanced hydrology. They did this without computers, without precise measuring tools, without modern mathematics. They used observation, trial and error, accumulated wisdom passed from master to apprentice across generations. They understood water in ways we have forgotten. They could read the land like a book. They knew where water wanted to flow and how to guide it where they needed it to go. The construction methods were brutal in their simplicity. Workers used rammed earth to build the canal walls. They dug down to bedrock when they could find it. They pounded soil and clay into layers so dense that water could not pass through. They lined sections with stone where erosion threatened. Every mile of canal represented years of backbreaking labor. The scale defies comprehension. Some sections of the Grand Canal stretched 60 feet wide. Others narrowed to 30. The depth varied but averaged around 10 feet, enough for the flat-bottomed boats that would carry the empire's goods. The total length exceeded 1,100 miles. If you walked beside it from end to end, it would take you months. And this was just just one canal. The Grand Canal was the centerpiece, the crown jewel, but it was part of a much larger network. Smaller canals branched off like veins from an artery. They reached into provinces and regions. They connected cities and towns. They brought water to farms and factories. The total length of all the canals combined stretched for thousands upon thousands of miles. Why did they do it? The reasons were many, and they were urgent. Food was the first concern. China's population was growing. The fertile lands of the south produced rice in abundance. The dry north needed that rice to survive. But moving grain overland was slow and expensive. Roads were poor. Carts broke down. Bandits attacked supply trains. A journey that took months by road could be completed in weeks by water. A single barge could carry what would require hundreds of carts. The canals made it possible to feed the empire. But food was not the only cargo. Silk traveled the canals. Tea, salt, iron, timber. Everything the empire needed moved on these waterways. The canals became highways of commerce. Cities grew up along their banks. Markets thrived at the intersections where canals met. Wealth flowed as steadily as the water. The military value was enormous. An emperor could move troops quickly to any part of the realm. Rebellions could be crushed before they spread. Invasions could be met with overwhelming force. The canals gave the central government control over vast distances. They made it possible to govern a land that would otherwise have been ungovernable. Cultural exchange followed the water. Ideas traveled with the merchants. Art and literature spread from south to north. Regional differences blurred. The canals helped create a unified Chinese identity. People who might never have met now traded goods and shared stories. The waterways connected not just places but minds. The environmental impact was profound. The canals changed the landscape permanently. Wetlands were drained. Rivers were diverted. The natural flow of water was interrupted and redirected. Some species thrived in the new ecosystem. Others vanished. The Chinese engineers were reshaping nature itself. They understood that they were changing the world. Ancient texts reveal their awareness of what they were doing. They wrote about the need to work with nature rather than against it. They studied the seasonal patterns of rivers. They observed how water behaved in different soils. They learned to predict floods and droughts. This knowledge was sacred. It was powerful. It could make or break an empire. The construction techniques evolved over time. Early canals were simple trenches. Later ones incorporated sophisticated engineering principles. The builders learned to calculate gradients with remarkable precision. A canal that descended too steeply would erode. Water would wash away the banks. A canal that was too level would stagnate. Silt would accumulate. The flow had to be just right. They developed tools for dredging, machines that could scoop mud from the canal bottom. Teams of workers operated these devices in coordinated rhythm. The work was constant. Maintenance never ended. A canal required as much effort to maintain as it took to build, perhaps more. The social organization required was staggering. Millions of workers needed to be fed, housed, and coordinated. Officials had to plan the work years in advance. Resources had to be gathered from across the empire. Iron for tools, stone for foundations, timber for locks and bridges, food for the workers. The logistics alone would challenge a modern government. The financing came from taxes and forced labor. Peasants owed service to the state. They spent months away from their farms, digging canals they might never use. The burden fell hardest on the poorest. The benefits flowed to the wealthy and powerful. This has always been the way of great projects. But something remarkable happened. Despite the suffering, despite the death toll, the canals endured. They outlasted the dynasties that built them. They survived wars and revolutions. They adapted to changing needs. Some sections fell into disuse. Others were renovated and expanded. The canals proved more permanent than the emperors who commanded their construction. The Grand Canal reached its final form during the Yuan dynasty. Mongol rulers who conquered China saw the value in the existing waterways. They connected the remaining gaps. They straightened sections that wandered. They added new locks and dredged deeper channels. Under their rule, the canal became a true highway from north to south. The engineering challenges they faced would seem impossible even today. In some regions, the canal had to cross areas where the water table was below the surface. The canal would drain into the ground. The solution was to line these sections with clay so dense that it was nearly waterproof. Workers pounded the clay for weeks, compacting it until it formed a barrier. In other areas, the canal had to traverse ridges and hills. The builders could not simply dig through hundreds of feet of rock. Instead, they found the lowest passes. They carved channels through solid stone. They built embankments that carried water over valleys. These sections were marvels of engineering. Stone arches supported aqueducts that carried boats through the air. The summit sections were the most difficult. These were the highest points on the canal's route. Water from both directions flowed away from these summits. Keeping them filled required constant replenishment. The engineers built complex systems of feeder canals that brought water from distant sources. They constructed gates that controlled the flow with precision. Too much water wasted the the precious resource. Too little, and boats ran aground. The boats themselves were designed for the canals, flat-bottomed vessels with low profiles. They could navigate shallow water. They could pass through locks with inches to spare. Sails caught the wind when it blew favorably. Long poles pushed them through calm sections. Teams of men pulled them with ropes when neither wind nor poles sufficed. The boats became floating homes for the families who operated them. Generations were born, lived, and died on these vessels, never setting foot on land. Life along the canals developed its own rhythm. Towns grew into cities. Villages became trading posts. The constant flow of traffic created opportunities. Inns housed travelers. Restaurants fed hungry crews. Workshops repaired boats and built new ones. Markets sold everything from silk to vegetables. The canal economy employed millions. The government controlled the traffic. Permits were required. Tolls were collected. Officials inspected cargoes. The bureaucracy grew to match the size of the waterway system. Corruption was inevitable. Merchants paid bribes to speed their passage. Officials grew rich from their positions. The canal became a source of wealth and power for those who controlled it. But the system worked. Goods moved. Food reached the hungry. The empire functioned. For all its flaws, the canal network achieved what it was meant to achieve. It united China. The technical knowledge required was passed down through guilds and families. Master engineers trained apprentices. The secrets of lock construction, of water management, of foundation building, these were closely guarded. A family might specialize in one aspect of canal work for generations. Their expertise was valuable. It was literally priceless because it could not be bought, only learned through years of practice. The tools they used seemed primitive to modern eyes, but in skilled hands, they were remarkably effective. Levels made from bamboo and water determined gradients. Measuring rods marked distances. Calculations were performed with counting rods or abacuses. The precision they achieved with these simple instruments rivals what we can do today with computers. Some mysteries remain. Certain sections of the ancient canals show engineering solutions that we still do not fully understand. How did they achieve perfect grades over distances of miles without modern surveying equipment? How did they predict water volumes with such accuracy? How did they coordinate the work of thousands of laborers without radio or telephone? The answer lies partly in mathematics we have rediscovered and partly in knowledge that was lost. Ancient Chinese mathematicians understood principles of hydraulics that Europe would not discover for centuries. They calculated volumes and flows. They understood pressure and resistance. They applied these principles to practical problems with impressive results. But there was also something else, an intuitive understanding of water that came from centuries of observation. The engineers could look at a landscape and see the hidden paths water would take. They understood the relationship between rain and river levels. They could predict how soil would behave when saturated. This knowledge was not written in books. It lived in the minds of the engineers and died with them when their tradition ended. The environmental engineering was sophisticated. The canals had to drain agricultural land without causing erosion. They had to manage floodwaters without drowning surrounding areas. They had to maintain water quality over long distances. The solutions involved careful attention to flow rates, to vegetation along the banks, to the angle of the canal walls. They planted specific trees along the canals. Roots stabilized the soil. The shade kept the water cool. The fallen leaves provided nutrients for fish. Every element served multiple purposes. This was not accidental. It was the result of careful planning and long experience. The canals changed the climate in subtle ways. Large bodies of water, moderate temperature. Areas near the canals experienced milder winters and cooler summers. Humidity increased. Local rainfall patterns shifted. These effects were small but measurable. The landscape was transformed not just physically but climatically. Wildlife adapted to the new environment. Fish populations exploded in some sections. Birds found new nesting sites along the altered waterways. Some species declined as their habitats vanished. Others thrived in the changed ecosystem. The canals created a new biological environment that had never existed before. The social impact extended beyond commerce and transportation. The canals became part of Chinese culture. Poets wrote about them, artists painted them. Stories and legends grew up around famous sections. Certain bridges became landmarks. Particular locks had reputations. The canals entered the imagination of the people. Festivals were held along the banks. Boat races became tradition. The canals were not just infrastructure. They were living spaces. Communities formed around them. Identities were built on proximity to the water. To live along the canal was to be part of something larger than yourself. The decline of the canals began slowly. As China modernized, railroads offered competition. Trains were faster and could carry heavier loads. The advantage of water transport diminished. Maintenance of the canals became expensive. Sections fell into disrepair. Silt accumulated. Banks eroded. Locks broke down. Political upheaval in the 19th and 20th centuries disrupted the management systems. The bureaucracy that had maintained the canals for centuries collapsed. Local authorities lacked resources. The central government had other priorities. The canals were neglected. Some sections were abandoned entirely. Filled with weeds and mud, they became swamps and then dry land. Nature reclaimed what humans had taken. But other sections survived. The Grand Canal continued to function. Boats still traveled its length. Commerce still flowed, though diminished. In recent decades, China has recognized the value of the canals again. Restoration projects have begun. Ancient sections are being dredged and rebuilt. Modern locks are being installed alongside historical ones. The canals are being integrated into contemporary infrastructure. Today, the Grand Canal is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is recognized as one of humanity's greatest engineering achievements. Tourists visit to see locks that have functioned for 1,000 years. Historians study the construction techniques. Engineers marvel at the solutions to problems that modern technology still struggles to solve. The canals tell us something profound about human capability. They show what can be accomplished with organization and determination. They demonstrate that ancient peoples were not primitive. They were sophisticated, intelligent, and capable of extraordinary feats. The cost was terrible. We cannot forget the suffering that went into every mile. Workers who died building these waterways deserve to be remembered. Their names are lost, but their achievement remains. Every time water flows through these ancient channels, it flows over the bones of those who made it possible. The engineering principles developed for the canals influenced other projects. The same techniques used to manage water were applied to irrigation systems, to flood control, to harbor construction. The knowledge spread beyond China. Travelers carried ideas westward. Trade routes transmitted information as surely as they transmitted goods. Some historians argue that the canal system was essential to China's development as a unified nation. Without the ability to move resources efficiently, the empire might have fragmented into smaller states. The canals made centralized government possible. They allowed Beijing to control provinces thousands of miles away. They gave emperors the tools to project power across vast distances. Others point to the human cost and question whether the achievement was worth the suffering. Millions died in the construction. Millions more lived in poverty while resources were diverted to canal projects. The benefit flowed primarily to the elite while the burden fell on the masses. Was it justified? There is no simple answer. History is not a moral equation with clear solutions. Canals existed. They served purposes both noble and exploitative. They fed the hungry and enriched the powerful. They united a nation and oppressed its people. All these things are true simultaneously. What cannot be disputed is the engineering genius involved. The ancient Chinese engineers solved problems that would challenge us today. They worked with limitations we can barely imagine. They achieved results that still stand centuries later. This demands respect regardless of the political and social context. The techniques they developed were rediscovered independently in other cultures, or perhaps the knowledge traveled farther than we know. Trade routes connected China to the Middle East, to Europe, to Africa. Ideas moved along these routes. It is possible that Chinese hydraulic engineering influenced Roman aqueducts, Islamic irrigation systems, Dutch canal networks. The connections are difficult to prove, but intriguing to consider. What we can prove is this. The pound lock system used in modern canals worldwide is essentially the same technology the Chinese invented over 1,000 years ago. The basic principles of canal construction have not changed. We use different materials in bigger machines, but the fundamental approach is the same. This is the mark of truly great engineering, solutions that remain valid across centuries. The canals also represent a different relationship with nature than we have today. The ancient engineers did not see themselves as conquering nature, but as working within it. They redirected water, but they did not try to eliminate it. They adapted their designs to the landscape rather than forcing the landscape to conform to their designs. There is wisdom in this approach that we are only now beginning to relearn. Modern environmentalism often looks to indigenous and ancient practices for sustainable approaches. The Chinese canal system offers lessons in water management that are relevant today. How to maintain flow without depleting sources. How to prevent erosion while allowing necessary drainage. How to create systems that endure not just for years but for centuries. The canals also teach us about maintenance. Common failure of modern infrastructure is lack of long-term planning. We build, but we do not maintain. The Chinese understood that a canal required constant attention. They built maintenance into the system from the beginning. They created institutions whose sole purpose was upkeep. This is why the canals lasted while other ancient structures crumbled. The organizational challenge of managing such a vast network teaches us about governance. You cannot control thousands of miles of waterway without effective communication, without clear chains of command, without systems for allocating resources. The bureaucracy that managed the canals was one of history's most sophisticated administrative structures. It had to coordinate activities across vast distances without modern communication technology. It had to collect information, make decisions, and implement policies empire-wide. The systems they developed developed influenced Chinese government for centuries. The cultural impact persists to this day. Chinese language and literature are filled with references to the canals. Idioms and expressions derived from canal life are still in common use. The collective memory of the canal era shapes how Chinese people think about infrastructure, about collective effort, about the relationship between government and citizen. Walking along the Grand Canal today, you can see layers of history. Ancient stone locks sit beside modern concrete ones. Traditional boats share the water with industrial barges. Old bridges arch over sections that have flowed for 1,000 years. New sections cut through landscapes that the ancient engineers never saw. The past and present exist simultaneously. Local people still live along the banks. Their lives are shaped by the water just as their ancestors' lives were. They fish the canals. They use the water for irrigation. They maintain small traditions connected to the waterway. The connection between people and canal has endured longer than any dynasty. Archaeologists continue to discover new information about the canal system. Excavations reveal construction techniques. Ancient documents come to light in archives. Each discovery adds to our understanding. Each finding raises new questions. How much more is there to learn? What secrets still lie buried along those ancient banks? The greatest mystery may be the simplest one. How did they conceive of such a project in the first place? Who first imagined connecting rivers that nature had separated? Who believed it could be done when everything suggested it was impossible? That leap of imagination may be the most impressive achievement of all. Someone looked at an empire divided by geography and envisioned it united by water. Someone believed that human effort could reshape the land itself. Someone had the audacity to dream on a scale that staggers us even now, with all our technology and knowledge. That vision, that belief, that audacity, those are what made the canals possible. The engineering followed from the vision. The tools were developed because they were needed. The techniques were refined through practice, but none of it would have happened without that initial, impossible dream. This is perhaps the most important lesson the canals teach us. Great achievements begin with great imagination. We build different things today. We have different challenges. The principle remains the same. If you can envision it clearly enough, if you commit fully enough, if you persist long enough, you can reshape the world. The ancient Chinese engineers proved this. They left us evidence carved in stone and earth, flowing through channels that have outlasted empires. The Grand Canal still flows. After more than 1,000 years, water still moves through those ancient channels. Boats still navigate locks built by hands long turned to dust. The engineering still functions. The dream still lives. Stand on a bridge over the Grand Canal and watch the water pass beneath you. That water connects you to the past in a direct, physical way. It flows through the same channels that carried boats 1,000 years ago. It follows gradients calculated by engineers who never imagined you would exist. It passes through locks designed before your nation was born, before your language was spoken, before your ancestors were born. The water remembers everything. It remembers the workers who died digging the channel. It remembers the boats loaded with rice that fed millions. It remembers emperors who traveled in magnificent barges. It remembers merchants and soldiers and families. It remembers drought and flood and everything between. The water carries all of this history in its flow, and it flows still. That is the miracle. That is the achievement. Just that they built something great, but that they built something that endures. The canals are not museum pieces. They are not dead relics of a vanished age. They are living infrastructure, still serving, still connecting, still uniting. In our modern world of rapid change and planned obsolescence, the ancient canals stand as a reproach and an inspiration. A reproach because we build things meant to last only years or decades, while they built for centuries. An inspiration because they prove it is possible to create enduring solutions to fundamental problems. The problems the canals addressed have not changed. People still need food. Goods still need to move. Societies still need to be connected. Water is still precious and needs to be managed wisely. The challenges are eternal, even if the specific circumstances change. The ancient engineers created solutions that remain relevant because they addressed fundamental needs in fundamental ways. This is the measure of true genius. Not solving the problems of the moment, but solving the problems of all moments. Not building for a generation, but building for all generations. Not thinking in terms of years, but in terms of centuries. The canal builders thought this way. They planned for descendants they would never meet. They created infrastructure for a future they could not imagine. We are that future. We are the people they built for. We benefit from their labor even now. We travel on their waterways. We study their techniques. We learn from their mistakes and their triumphs. We are connected to them across the vast gulf of time by the water that still flows in channels they dug. This connection should humble us. We are not the first people to face enormous challenges. We are not the first to attempt great things. Others came before us. They had fewer resources and less knowledge, but perhaps more vision and determination. They succeeded where we might fail because they believed fully in what they were doing. The canals represent human capability at its peak, not modern humans with modern tools, but humans in any age with sufficient determination. They show that the most important tool is not physical, but mental. Imagination, planning, persistence. These are what make great things possible. These are what the ancient Chinese engineers had in abundance. The story of the canals is ultimately a story about water and earth and human will. Water that wanted to flow one way but was persuaded to flow another. Earth that was solid and immovable but was moved anyway. Human will that faced the impossible and made it real. These three elements combined to create something that changed the world. The canals changed China's geography, economy, culture, and history. They made possible the China we know today. Without them, the nation would have developed differently. Perhaps it would have fractured into smaller states. Perhaps it would have unified anyway, but more slowly and with more difficulty. We cannot know what might have been. We only know what was. What was is remarkable enough. A network of waterways spanning thousands of miles. Locks that still function after 1,000 years. Engineering solutions that modern experts study and admire. A legacy that endures when so much else has vanished. Visit the canals today and you will see the past living in the present. You will see ancient principles applied to modern problems. You will see techniques refined over centuries still in use. You will see human ingenuity transcending time. But you will also see something else. You will see beauty. The canals are not merely functional. They are elegant. The curve of a lock gate, the arch of a stone bridge, the way light reflects off water that has flowed for 1,000 years. Beauty was not incidental to the design. It was essential to it. The engineers understood that great works should inspire as well as serve. This dual nature, this combination of utility and beauty, marks the greatest human achievements. The canals work, and they move the soul. They serve practical purposes, and they elevate the spirit. They feed the body and nourish the imagination. They are completely practical and completely inspirational at the same time. Perhaps this is why they endure. Things built only for function are abandoned when better function comes along. Things built only for beauty are preserved but unused. Things built for both function and beauty are maintained and valued across generations. They remain relevant even as the world changes around them. The ancient Chinese engineers knew this. They built for function first, but they never forgot beauty. They created works that served their time and transcended. They left us gifts that keep giving centuries later. We stand at a different moment in history. We face different challenges, but the fundamental questions remain the same. How do we unite divided people? How do we move resources from where they are to where they are needed? How do we work with nature rather than against it? How do we build things that will serve not just ourselves but our children's children's children? The canals offer answers, not specific blueprints but general principles. Think big, plan carefully, work persistently, accept that great achievements require great sacrifice. Build for the long term. Create beauty alongside utility. Work with natural forces instead of fighting them. Maintain what you build. Pass knowledge to the next generation. These lessons are ancient, but they are not outdated. They are perhaps more relevant now than ever. In an age of quick fixes and short-term thinking, the canals remind us of what is possible when we think in terms of centuries rather than quarters. The water still flows. The locks still lift boats from one level to another. The dreams of ancient engineers still function in the modern world. This is the power of vision, combined with skill, of imagination supported by knowledge, of ambition backed by determination. Stand beside the Grand Canal at dawn. Watch the sun rise over water that has flowed since before your ancestors were born. Listen to the sound of that eternal flow. Feel the presence of all the hands that shaped these banks, all the minds that planned these routes, all the hearts that believed this impossible thing could be done. They were right to believe. Their impossible dream became concrete reality. It became stone and water and earth shaped to human purpose. It became a highway that connected an empire. It became a legacy that outlasted the civilization that created it. And it flows still, always flowing, carrying the memory of what was and the promise of what might be, reminding us that humans can do extraordinary things when they commit fully to extraordinary visions, teaching us that the greatest achievements are not those that serve only the moment, but those that serve all moments to come. The water remembers everything, and it keeps flowing, carrying that memory forward into a future the ancient engineers could never have imagined, but built for anyway. This is their gift to us. This is their message across time. Dream impossible dreams. Build impossible things. Create something that will outlast you, that will serve people you will never meet, that will carry your vision forward long after your name is forgotten. The ancient Chinese engineers understood this. They left us evidence carved in the very earth. They left us water still flowing in channels they designed. They left us proof that human beings can reshape the world when they have sufficient vision and determination. They left us the canals, cycles. And the canals remain, flowing quietly through the centuries, connecting past to present, earth to water, dream to reality, carrying in their eternal flow the greatest lesson of all, that what we build with care and vision and determination can outlast empires, can transcend time itself, can speak to futures we cannot imagine with a voice that never fades. The water remembers everything, and it flows on forever.